live.
Hey, today's episode is sponsored by Smalls. In this world we're living in these days, things are a little crazy. Maybe you want to, snuggle up with your cat a little bit. A lot of similarities between my cat, Griffin, in the news cycle. I don't know which day he's going to pee in the apartment or take a poop outside of the cat litter. But one thing is for sure, my cat loves Smalls. This podcast is sponsored by Smalls. If you're a listener to the show, you know that my cat loves Smalls. You know that Matt's cat loves Smalls. You get both of them. You get 60% off your first order plus free shipping. Head to smalls.com. Use our promo code majority for a limited time only. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients that you would find in your fridge. The best part is it's delivered right to your door. That's why cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. Smalls also not just has a whole array of different flavors. My cat loves the chicken one and the one with the turkey. He's more of like a fowl guy, I guess. But they also have all sorts of snacks. Like they have this broth that you can pour in and sort of hyperize the food, I guess.
Make your dry food a little bit more exciting.
Exactly. They got some freeze-dried puffy balls. This comes in, you can get it in with your Smalls order. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. And that, of course, is a big deal. If you have a particularly picky cat, Smalls has a sampler, so you can get your cat to try everything Smalls has to offer. And the teams at Smalls is so confident your cat's going to love their product, you can try it risk-free. That means if the cat won't eat their food, Smalls will refund you. What are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve. For a limited time only, because you're a Majority Report viewer or listener, you can get 60% off your first Smalls order plus free shipping by using the code MAJORITY. That's 60% off when you head to smalls.com. Use the promo code MAJORITY. Again, that's promo code MAJORITY. 60% off your first order plus free shipping at smalls.com. We'll put the link in the podcast and YouTube description. And now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, July 28, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Brian Goldstone, journalist and author of There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America. Also on the program today, Trump supposedly makes a trade deal with the EU as reports emerge that the Japanese deal may have been vaporware. Another report, the DOJ gives Ghislaine Maxwell conditioned immunity. This as Trump runs from the Epstein claims. Trump gives Russia 10 to 12 days to end its invasion of Ukraine. Maybe that's 11, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12.
Gosh, what is this fixation on deadlines?
It's 10 to 12.
It's 13 to 14 then, maybe.
And why declare them publicly?
It's firm-ish.
Semi-firm.
Meanwhile, two leading Israeli rights groups accuse Israel of genocide in Gaza. This, as Netanyahu says, no one is starving. At least that's what he says in English. DOJ drops its case versus Los Angeles protesters after ICE officers caught lying about in their booking reports. Trump wants to prosecute Beyonce. I didn't read the rest of the story.
She's a black woman. You know how I feel about those.
Doing country music while black is against the law.
Democrats plan $20 million fund to target Texas redistricting in a hope to scare Texas congressional Republicans. Meanwhile, another whistleblower claims that the DOJ planned to ignore courts. New report, 1 in 5 homes in California are investor-owned. And a poll finds Democrats with their lowest approval rating in 35 years. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on a Monday. It is...
Fun Day Monday.
Fun Day Monday. I guess that's what we're doing here. Fun Day Monday. I don't know. Weekend went a little fast. It could be fun day.
Yeah.
It could be fun day. It could be fun day. We'll see. This report, obviously, there's a newfound. We talked about this with Mehdi on Friday, but there is a seemingly sort of now a broad understanding in the mainstream media that there is mass starvation going on in Gaza. This is not something that happens overnight, although I guess with children it literally could. But there is a broader understanding of it, and we're starting to see more understanding and appreciation that the death toll in Gaza, which, of course, we've been saying here, and Emma's been beating this drum for months and months and months, is probably significantly larger than the official tally. At this point,
that's all they can verify, basically, in terms of they need to be able to put names to people in order to count the death toll as official, but there are literally just hundreds of thousands of people unaccounted for, likely under rubble.
Miles of rubble.
There's just, there were reports maybe a year ago that they were just like putting flesh and body parts into bags and in some way like sort of semi-counting that as one dead person, but that's not in the official death toll. I mean, Israel hasn't let any journalists outside of the Palestinian journalists who they're assassinating in Gaza in for a reason, and it's because they don't want the West to catch up to what they're doing until it's entirely too late. And that's my cynical feeling about this moment right now. I'm happy to see Obama and other Democrats talking about starvation in Gaza. But my feeling is that this is a bit of a CYA, because we know that the level of starvation that so many people are facing, it might quite literally be too late, even if they were to get nutrition tomorrow or in the next hour.
And I've seen now we're starting to see reports. I mean, again, because of those reasons, much of it is sort of educated guesses, but up to perhaps 20% of the Palestinian population in Gaza could be dead now. And with this said, two human rights groups in separate reports released jointly said that Israel's policies in Gaza, statements about senior officials about its goals, and the systemic dismantling of the territory's health system has contributed to their conclusion of genocide. The two groups, B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel, have not been allowed into Gaza. Their reports are based on testimonies, documents, eyewitnesses, and consultations with legal experts. So there is a growing awareness across, various sectors of, I guess, of the world. and including within the context of Israel. And it seems, like we say, increasingly in this country that Israel's not only guilty of genocide and a willful starvation of the Palestinian people living in Gaza. And we're starting to see one of the indications that something feels imminent, whether it is like, the understanding that journalists are going to get in there, that people are going to start to have documented accounts of what's going on in there from the outside world into Gaza, is starting to, it appears, make many of those who are the architects of this and the enablers of this worried that they may have to be held to account. And at least rhetorically, we're starting to see sort of the most obscene of defenses. It's not hard to find some of these people on Twitter or X saying, well, people were saying that it was a genocide so early. People were saying that there was mass starvation so early that it made it impossible for us to be aware of it. And not the least of which is Anthony Blinken, who is on the X-Files podcast with Christiane Amanpour. This is what Blinken had to say. It's just shocking and appalling.
Of course, I'm very proud of my heritage. And of course, what happened on October 7th resonated in a personal way with me, not just a professional way, because in my own family history, I have, relatives who were forced out of countries by pogroms and came to the United States. A late stepfather who was a Holocaust survivor who survived Auschwitz and Dachau and Majdanek and all these camps. His entire family was exterminated. And so the act, the horrific act of October 7th brought a lot of that to the surface. And I thought it was important in that moment to connect in a personal way with so many people in Israel who were traumatized. But in so many ways, that day in the collective global consciousness has been almost erased by everything that followed. And
why is that?
I wish.
I'm sorry. Like this level of narcissism is just exhausting. It's exhausting. What happened to Blinken's ancestors is a horrific crime, or family members is a horrific crime, which is why people were saying in the wake of October 7th, let's not commit those crimes again. When we're talking about the starvation, this is going to affect, even if people survive this genocide, like it did for Jews in the extermination camps in the Holocaust. It's going to affect their children on a cellular level. This is the generational trauma that he inflicted on Palestine, that he's using this moment to talk about his own history. You did it to other people. It's going to be the same thing. The genetics of these folks will be indelibly altered by the starvation that they've experienced, and their children will feel the effects. So he's talking about his experience with this when he's doing it to other people.
At those, and I feel this so strongly because I also feel deeply the suffering of men, women, and children in Gaza. I've met with families, American families, Palestinian Americans, who lost their entire families, little girls and little boys. I have the pictures that I've still kept of one family. And so I have some sense of what they're going through, and there's no hierarchy of loss. There's no hierarchy. There's no difference.
Sounds like it.
Between an Israeli child, a Palestinian child.
I mean, what's shocking about this is that he could easily have been citing his family as a fundamental reason why I would not enable this to happen again. And it is as if he had nothing to do with the policy.
No agency.
Nothing, like absolutely just sort of everything in the passive voice here. And but he is now sort of like, this is his wind up to find out like why, what's going to justify his fundamental role in enabling this. Continue.
killed in this horror that Hamas initiated. But I wish as well that those who understandably have been so moved and motivated by everything that's happened since October 7th, if they'd spent just maybe 10% of their time calling on Hamas, demanding Hamas put down its arms, give up the hostages, stop what it's doing. Maybe if the world had done that, we'd also be in a different place. But to come to your question, more specifically.
Just hold on, stop. I mean, just like in what possible scenario, aside from the fact that we know on multiple occasions, including under the Biden administration, Hamas offered to release all the hostages. I mean, from day one, release all the hostages if no invasion. But subsequent to that, release the hostages if you promise to end the war. I mean, what possible difference if 10% of anything, of anybody, like what is he talking about here?
Also,
this is just some type of excuse for him to sort of justify, like,
yeah,
they sort of made us do it.
Right. I mean, it's like saying, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. It was so horrific. And so everything that followed, it was basically understandable. And you have to understand the full picture of the extermination. Like, it's unfathomable. And also, Hamas did not start this on October 7th. Israel has been, quote, putting Gaza on a diet, blocking food and electricity and water and all of that for decades. They have been putting Palestinians on a diet for this entire time period. This is just the final solution of the starvation that has already been in place for almost my entire lifetime.
Does anybody think that Blinken's State Department put 10% of its energy towards getting Israel to stop? Nobody in the world could argue that.
Continue. Let's just see. Give it another couple of seconds.
Calling on Hamas, demanding Hamas put down its arms, give up the hostages, stop what it's doing. Maybe if the world had done that, we'd also be in a different place. But to come to your question, more specifically, look, I think what President Biden told Prime Minister Netanyahu from day one, exactly as you said, was exactly right. And there's a big difference between doing your best to eliminate the threat such that what happened on October 7th couldn't be repeated versus some futile and misguided campaign to try to eradicate all of Hamas that simply is not going to happen and will leave Israel holding the bag. We believe before the October 7th, there were somewhere around 35 to 40,000 armed Hamas militants, again, organized militarily. And that military organization was dismantled by what Israel did, and it was dismantled more.
Whatever.
I mean, it's as if he had absolutely no role in any of this. It is fascinating and also just horrific. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Just one final note. I would, if you want to feel a little bit heartened, go to the comment section of Amanpour's video here, and every one of them is like the top one here. This guy is a war criminal. Genocide, Blinken still lying. How does he sleep at night? His compliance to the horrific suffering of the Palestinian people will be his legacy. So this ain't working. And they should probably course correct, if only for their self-preservation, because I know Blinken doesn't actually care about Palestinians, despite claiming to carry photos with them around.
And you just headline this, Sam. The Democratic Party's approval rating is the lowest it's been in, 30 years is what you said? So could supporting a genocide and stabbing Palestinians in the back as opposed to in the chest like the Republicans do, could that have anything to do with how people feel about it? I mean, New York primary voters seem to think so.
We'll see. All right. Well, in a moment, we're going to be talking to Brian Goldstone. He is a journalist and author of There Is No Place for Us, Working in Homelessness in America, and couldn't be also relevant both in terms of what's going on in the country in terms of homelessness and also just in the wake of Donald Trump's executive order from 3 or 4 days ago on I hesitate to say that it's actually addressing the unhoused as much as it is sort of some type of notion that, well, we should round everybody up and put them into an institution. But we can talk about that in a moment. We've got a couple of sponsors. Very easy to put off your doctor's appointment, whether you have avoided going or just booking one. And why? Because it's usually a pain in the butt. Maybe you need a dentist appointment. Maybe you've been waiting to go see a doctor for 3 years. Well, ZocDoc makes it super easy to find the doctor right now, and makes it all easy online, and helps in finding out if they take your insurance. Leave it to a professional. I don't know about you, but my social feed is filled with different health trends. Can red light therapy solve every skin problem? Should you be slamming olive oil shots? Let's give it the algorithm a rest. Turn to healthcare professionals. With ZocDoc, it's easy. You can find doctors that are right for you and instantly book an appointment online. As I get older, I catch myself thinking I should go to the doctor more, without a doubt. Things like stress, aches, but it can be tough to find one. You want to keep yourself healthy, but it's hard to find the right doctor. That is until ZocDoc shows up. They make it so easy to find the right fit and book an appointment fast directly on their website. ZocDoc is a free app or website. You can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors and click instantly to book an appointment. ZocDoc lets you book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty. You can filter for doctors who are near you, filters for ones that take your insurance, ones that are a good fit for you. You can find the type of care you're looking for. Maybe it's you want a good bedside manner. Maybe you want fast wait times. Maybe you want doctors who are considered to have good listening skills. And then the best part is you can see their actual appointment openings. You don't have to go back and forth with
on the
somebody
phone. And with doctors' offices, it makes it so much easier.
So much easier. You click, you instantly book a visit. Appointments are made through ZocDoc, also happen fast, within 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even get same-day appointments. Emma, you've used ZocDoc.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really helpful because it's just so hard to get doctors on the phone. And I don't understand why, everybody isn't using this, to be honest with you.
It's super easy, and they have all sorts of doctors. You got a foot problem, there's podiatrists. I don't know the name of other doctors, but I do know podiatrists. Stop putting off those doctor appointments. Go to ZocDoc.com/majority to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/majority, ZocDoc.com/majority. We'll put the link in the podcast and YouTube description. Also, this episode sponsored by Liquid IV. I really don't have to say too much. Every day I do this show, I am drinking at least one of these. Sometimes I make it into the second one. I feel it the whole day too. It actually, I mean, you got to stay hydrated, particularly in this weather. It is incredibly hot. And if you're soaking up the last bits of summer or gearing up for those back to routine vibes, capture sun-drenched memories with Orange Vanilla Dream Hydration Multiplier from Liquid IV. It's the nostalgic vanilla flavor with notes of candied orange. It's like one of those, what were those popsicles? I can't remember what the name of it is. But for ice cream. Creamsicles, yeah, with the orange. Anyways. liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityRep at checkout. You get 20% off your first order. Liquid IV helps boost hydration. Super easy, super convenient. You get a packet, you tear it, you pour it in, you pour your water in. Helps boost hydration. And for me, I'm using their sugar-free options. They got white peach, they got lemon lime, they got rainbow sherbet, and more. I happen to like the cranberry lemonade. It's delicious. Just one stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. 3 times the electrolytes of leading sports drink. 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. Really makes a big difference. Great to travel with, super easy. Saul's got a headache at the end of the day because of camp. A Liquid IV it is. Savor the last bits of summer with Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more. Go to liquidiv.com. Get 20% off your first order with the code MajorityRep. Not Majority Report, MajorityRep at checkout. That's 20% off your first order with code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. We will put the link in the podcast and YouTube description. Quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Brian Goldstone, journalist and author of There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Brian Goldstone, journalist and author of There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America. Brian, welcome to the program.
It's really great to be with you.
Let's start with just sort of, you've written basically an ethnography in many respects, 5 families, let's just sort of take some of the broader pictures. You write about Atlanta, but Atlanta is, I think, in many respects, certainly, according to like indicative of a dynamic that we have going on in the country. But maybe we should just start with the idea of like what you believe is the delta between the official numbers of homelessness and what the actual numbers are.
Yeah, I was shocked to discover in the course of reporting this book and researching it over the 5-6 years, I was really, really shocked to discover that as bad as the official numbers on homelessness are, and it's important to note that in the last 2 years, we've seen the highest level of homelessness on record, according to the official count. As bad as those official numbers are, the reality is exponentially worse. There is this entire world of homelessness, what I refer to in the book as a kind of shadow realm of homelessness that we're not seeing, that is not just out of sight and invisible, but that has been actively rendered invisible. And I point out in the book, by cobbling together different data sources, that the true number of those who are unhoused right now in this country is, and this is a conservative estimate, about 6 times greater than the official number. So we're talking a catastrophe of truly unprecedented proportions. And I think that is just, while the book is based in Atlanta, the reality is that this truly is a nationwide crisis, and it reaches into every single corner of this country.
And so we should say, like, the official number is somewhere in the 700,000s. And so, your sense is that it's closer to over 4 million people. And I want to get to the Trump executive order, because on some level, like the rendered invisible, I mean, it seems to be the fundamental driving principle of that executive order is to, how can we make this this problem seem even more distant, I guess, in many respects. But let's start with, how did you choose? There were 4 families. 5, excuse me. And how did you choose these 5?
Yeah, I mean, it was less a matter, I think, of me choosing them than the question of like, who is going to allow me into their life in such a way that readers will experience what it looks like and what it feels like for parents, for their kids, when this most basic human necessity is always out of reach. And the book actually had its genesis in a magazine story that I reported and wrote for the New Republic over a period of about 7 months. And while I was reporting that book, I was just meeting tons and tons of families and individuals who were working and working and working some more, and it still wasn't enough to keep themselves and their children housed. Some journalists have a problem of, like, they have the story and then they need to find someone who is going to exemplify that story, who's going to carry it. For me, the problem wasn't like who is going to exemplify this. It's how do you narrow it down? I mean, there are so many people, not just in Atlanta, but again, across the country. And so, it was really a matter of meeting dozens of families, dozens of individuals, and through the course of just getting to know them and building trust, figuring out like who has space in their life for someone to just be immersing themselves, in their day-to-day lives. And that was really the aspiration for this book, was to just immerse myself in their day-to-day lives as much as humanly possible. And that's a pretty tall order for anyone, but especially for people who are already, completely, to put it mildly, maxed out with stress, with anxiety, trying to keep themselves housed and to find housing.
And what I was struck with is there are so many different, it feels like, I mean, just from these 5 examples, paths to this homeless. Now, a couple of them at least end up in almost the same scenario, particularly with these extended stay hotels, which is a story in and of itself in many respects. But let's start with, for instance, Celeste, because she was, I mean, lots of challenges she's dealing with, but her homelessness was a function of a landlord essentially trying to, I guess, take advantage of her house burning down by charging her. Her house burns down that she's renting.
Yeah.
And then he, without her knowledge, evicts her. She's obviously not in the house, but files an eviction notice without her awareness. And that just sort of like makes it impossible for her to get into other housing. Walk us through this story.
Yeah. Her story really illustrates why over the last few years of working on this, it has just driven me nuts to hear people talk about, families and individuals in America falling into homelessness. They are being pushed. And Celeste's story, as I think all of the family stories in the book show us, that this was a matter of being pushed. This wasn't a matter of falling. Her story, as you mentioned, begins in this really dramatic way, a very singular way, with her rental home burning down. It was later discovered that an abusive ex set fire to this rental home. She had recently taken a restraining order out on him. But even though it was this fire that was sort of the first domino that fell, it wasn't the fire that caused Celeste and her children to become homeless. It was the fact that, as you said, months after the house fire, she came to learn that her landlord, which was not a mom and pop landlord, it was a private equity firm called the Prager Group. They own tens of thousands of rental units across the South. The Prager Group demanded, when her home burned down, that she pay rent not only for that current month. The fire had happened at the beginning of the month. She hadn't yet paid her rent. Not only pay that current month's rent, but an additional month as well in order to be released from her lease. She, of course, refused to do that. She thought that was the end of it. And then months later, when she was applying for other apartments, was denied because of an eviction on her record. In Georgia, she didn't even have to be notified that an eviction had been filed against her. She didn't have to be notified in person. The sheriff was able to carry out what's called a tack and mail dispossessory. And when she went to the burned down home, which still hadn't been repaired, in the mailbox on the eviction notice was written by the sheriff, served to fire destroyed property. So, when I've told friends and colleagues about this story over the years, they say, oh, that's so tragic that, domestic violence, this house fire led to them becoming homeless. No, what led to them becoming homeless was a housing system that prioritizes, that has enabled firms like the Prager Group to prioritize profits over all else, over just the basic necessity for a place to live, that has so stacked the cards against tenants and given landlords all of the power. That is what pushed Celeste and her children into homelessness.
And she had 2 children. She was then subsequently diagnosed with, if I remember correctly, ovarian and breast cancer. And then she's looking for assistance. And this I found also just sort of stunning. Just walk us through her timeline briefly.
Yeah. So after the fire, after realizing with the eviction that her credit score has been tanked, that this 3-digit number that has come to determine whether millions of people in this country have access to housing and other basic necessities, when she realizes that her credit score is in effect locking her out of the formal housing market and essentially destroying any chance she has of getting back into housing, even if she can't afford it, she does what scores of other families have done. And she, in the absence of any family shelters, she went to an extended stay hotel. And this place at first was a kind of refuge for her, but she realizes over the next few weeks and then months that she has fallen into what people refer to as the hotel trap, that she has landed in what another family in the book calls an expensive prison. This extended stay hotel is basically an extremely profitable homeless shelter, and they are proliferating across the country. As it happens, private equity firms aren't just buying up the homes that people currently live in, the rental housing. They're also increasingly buying up the very places that families like Celeste are forced into once they become homeless. And so Blackstone and Starwood Capital, during the time that Celeste was living at this squalid extended stay hotel, they purchased Extended Stay America, the largest chain of extended stay hotels, for $6 billion, because they saw how extremely profitable all this precarity has become. So Celeste is desperate to get out of this hotel. She is desperate to get out. And finally, after refusing the term homeless for herself, she really wanted to kind of resist that label, because she had this kind of like name it and claim it theology, where if she put that label on herself, she would sort of become that in a very deep way. But finally, she's just desperate to get out. She's having to choose between going to her chemo appointment for ovarian and breast cancer to treat that cancer, or going to her warehouse job. And just one quick side note, this book is about the rise of the working homeless. And it's very important that we attend not only to the homeless side of that equation, but the working side as well. Because in Celeste's case, it wasn't just the poverty wages that she was earning at this warehouse job. It was the fact that she had no sick leave. She had no benefits, no health insurance. So if she doesn't go to work, she doesn't get paid. If she doesn't get paid, she and her children go from being in this room out on the street, and she goes to Gateway Center, the coordinated entry point to access homeless services in Atlanta. Every city in the country and municipality has their own version of Gateway, where you have to go to try to obtain services. And she is told that despite her cancer, she is not vulnerable enough. Her vulnerability score is too low to qualify for assistance. And in fact, she's told that because she is not in a shelter or on the street, she does not fit the definition of literal homelessness. That is HUD's sort of way of policing who counts as homeless. And, none of the families I write about in this book are counted as homeless. None of them fit the official definition. And Celeste leaves Gateway Center that day completely empty-handed. She's actually told, when she says, fine, we'll go to a shelter. And if that's what we have to do to be considered homeless, we'll go to a shelter. And the caseworker stops. She says, ma'am, actually, you mentioned that your son just turned 15. Celeste says, yeah. And the caseworker says, I'm sorry, none of the family shelters in Georgia allow boys over the age of 13. So he would have to go to a men's shelter by himself. And of course, she's not going to split up her family, and she leaves empty-handed. And that is what, it's bad enough to be homeless. The only thing worse than being homeless in America is not even earning the designation homeless, because then you are you literally don't count. Your experience is written out of the story we tell about homelessness, and you are denied any form of assistance.
Can I ask you a bit more about shelters and the role that they play in defining homelessness? A lot of accounts that we'll hear just up here in New York are that homeless shelters, there's a lot of lack of safety. People are fearful of being robbed. And it still is quite similar up north here that, like, you need to be able to be in a shelter to have certain designations. Like, when you speak to these people, what have been the broad experiences with shelters? And if you could clarify how that fits into how homelessness is defined legally.
Yeah, so just to get to the definition first, so every year when the point in time count is conducted, which is the federal government's official homeless census, where volunteers across the country fan out to count everyone who is experiencing homelessness, only those who are in shelters or on the street are counted. And so that has existed since 2005. And every year, when the point in time count results come out and those numbers are, they then appear in newspaper headlines, those headlines are reflecting what I would argue is just a very tiny sliver of the total homeless population. Here in DeKalb County in Georgia, where I live, which is one of the most populous counties in the South, right now, there is not a single shelter for families in the entire county. So when you don't have shelter, to put it in very real terms, like if you have one shelter in a city and you count everyone who is living in that shelter, that year that the point in time count is conducted, those families would count as homeless. If you close that shelter today, those families will go from being homeless to no longer being homeless simply because they are no longer in that shelter. If they're not on the street, if they do what families do, which is go in their cars or start staying in the overcrowded apartments of others or to these hotels. So it's this very arbitrary and I think very cruel way of limiting the scope of homelessness in this country. We can imagine that there are very clear political motivations to narrow the scope in this way. But New York is exceptional in that there is a right to shelter in New York. So the shelter system is unusually and exceptionally sprawling and large. And many of the families who are homeless in New York are in that shelter system, even though in New York too, there's just a huge number of people who are excluded. But that really is exceptional. In the rest of the country, it's not just a matter that shelters are unsafe, that the conditions are abysmal. It's often the case that they simply don't exist, especially for families. And when they don't exist, or when families can't access them or don't want to access them for very good reasons, they literally don't count.
You have another story about Britt, who also has two kids, younger kids. And the story of housing vouchers. And this dynamic, it seems sort of on some level analogous. This idea of like, if there's no housing, if there's no shelters, then there's no homeless people. This also feels like a bureaucratic way of actually sort of like ostensibly providing for unhoused people, but not ultimately having to by the sort of the context in which they offer. So walk us through what happens with Britt, who also ends up at an efficiency hotel. But I'm particularly like the Section 8 voucher, but tell us that story.
Yeah, I mean, Britt is really interesting because through her own life trajectory, you can kind of tell the story of housing policy in America. Britt is her roots in Atlanta go back 5 generations. When she was born, she and her family actually lived in public housing, and Atlanta was the first city in the country to build public housing, as it happens, in the 1930s. But by the time Britt was born, Atlanta had become the first city in the country to begin demolishing all of its public housing in favor of this neoliberal experiment in effectively leaving people's housing needs to the private market to meet and take care of. So Britt's family, as she's growing up, is displaced from the public housing where they live. And Britt, as a child, actually experiences homelessness with her mother living in these awful hotels and going from place to place, attending, I believe, 3 different schools in 1 year as a child. And she is determined as an adult with her own children to make a home for herself and her kids in the city. She's determined, not to leave. She also realizes that there is nowhere else to go for her because there really isn't anywhere that is more affordable, where she has family ties and so forth. And so, Britt, she everything for her hinges on the possibility of getting a housing voucher. And when the book opens, she has 2 years earlier won the voucher lottery. I think the fact that we even use the word lottery in relation to this absolutely essential form of assistance is telling. It says a lot about how we treat housing in America. But she wins the voucher lottery, and 2 years later, when the book opens, she's finally gotten off the waiting list. Here is the key to her having a home in the city, being able to afford it. What happens is that ultimately she can't find a landlord who will accept the voucher. There's a lot of talk within housing policy circles about how landlords discriminate against voucher holders for racist reasons, because of the stigma attached to those people, and that is certainly true. But what a lot of that discussion leaves out is how landlords are refusing to take vouchers in these hot rental markets because they simply don't have a financial incentive to, because they can't jack up rents at will. There's so much competition just for a single apartment that they can afford to refuse the subsidy. And when Britt ends up losing the voucher because it expires, the year that she loses her voucher, about 1,600 vouchers are issued to families in Atlanta, and 1,100 expire before they can be used. No landlord will accept it. That is what we did when we went from a model of public housing, of the government being directly involved in providing for housing, to leaving people's housing needs to the market and its whims.
That's just insane. That figure, that the 1,100 of the 1,600 expire. Obviously, these people have been waiting years to get these vouchers, and then they can't use them.
Yeah,
it's just insane. Let's also just one more example, because this is Maurice and Natalia. This is another example of sort of the industry that has been built around people's deprivation. I don't know how else to really say it. I mean, and the private equity stuff with both the owning the rental stock and then also owning the sort of like what happens when you lose the rental stock. It sort of feels like I don't know, somebody coming in and buying, like, we're going to buy all the dollar stores, and we're going to buy also I don't know what the Dollar Tree. And as people go from Dollar General to Dollar Tree because their pay gets cut or whatever it is, or the recession happens, we make money on both ends. But let's talk about Maurice and Natalia, because again, this is another situation where the building sold, they get booted. And then they end up having to get involved with Liberty Rent. And walk us through this, because this is also a crazy story.
Yeah, something I forgot to mention in relation to Britt's story that is definitely there for Maurice and Natalia as well, is the way that, the backdrop for all of this in a city like Atlanta. And here Atlanta is absolutely representative of any number of cities across the country. The backdrop for all of this is a city that has undergone this much celebrated renaissance, an absolute, just transformation of its urban center. rampant gentrification, corporate profits are surging, the signs of growth in Atlanta are everywhere. And, and what we are seeing is that families like Britt's, like Maurice and Natalia's, they're not just being pushed out of the neighborhoods they grew up in, they're being pushed out of housing altogether. So that's the backdrop. Maurice and Natalia, they actually grew up in DC, and they were priced out of their formerly Black working class neighborhood in DC and went to Atlanta as part of what has been termed the new Great Migration of, people whose grandparents, great grandparents fled the Jim Crow South in search of economic opportunity in the North. They come back to Atlanta, to the South, to this Black Mecca, thinking they can achieve their middle class aspirations here, only come to find out, after living in their apartment for several years, stably housed, their landlord decides to terminate their lease prematurely because it's a great time to sell. Their home, they realize, has all along been an investment vehicle for their landlord. And at that point, that when their lease is terminated, they and their children they're pushed into what a caseworker in the book calls the housing Hunger Games. They realize that the ground has kind of shifted under their feet just in the time they've been renting in Atlanta. They're thrust into the housing Hunger Games, and in that context, their credit score is too low because of student debt. They are forced to use this co-signing company called Liberty Rent, where you're basically paying these outrageous fees in order to have this company co-sign in order to get you into an apartment. That actually does nothing to keep them in their apartment. They end up getting evicted when they are only a few days late on their rent. Their landlord, like Celeste's, is a private equity firm, this one based in Nashville called Covenant Capital. And they have been employing this automated eviction system where if you're just a few days late, there's no human to call and talk to. An eviction is filed against you. And before they knew it, they were now living in a studio-sized hotel room at Extended Stay America. In the span of 8 months, they spent $17,000 on their room. That is more than double what they had been paying for the 2-bedroom apartment that they were just evicted from. So, as you were describing it, it truly is dystopian is a cliche to throw around, but there's no other word. It is a nightmarish scenario where there is nowhere to turn.
I want to pull out a little bit, but what have you in the time that you've done this reporting and the book comes out, have you followed up with some of these folks? What happens to these people?
Yeah, I have stayed in very, very close contact with all of them. We are in touch every week, sometimes every day. We're still in very close contact. One of the conditions for their participation in the book was that I would protect their privacy, and also we use pseudonyms in the book to protect their privacy, and especially the children. And also that what is contained in the book would be more or less what I talk about and describe. Fair. But having said that, I will just say, without getting into specifics, that as much as I wanted their stories to have a happy ending, and as much as my editor, just for readability, to not leave readers in this state of desperation and just despair, to give some happy endings. Maurice and Natalia, when the book ends, are the closest, I think, to having a happy end. They actually get into an apartment, but their dreams of homeownership, they realize, are dead. So that's very hard. Since then, all of the families have continued to struggle. They have, even with readers and myself, trying to offer financial support and other types of support, many of them, their credit scores are just too low. It shows that what people need is not a GoFundMe. They don't need necessarily just an infusion of cash, as important as money is. What we need is widespread systemic change. And they have just continued to sort of experience the vicissitudes of belonging to the renter class in the United States.
And what you're just, oh, sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, the Biden administration, and this is sort of like, one slice, but this kept occurring to me in the context of Celeste in terms of like credit scores and whatnot. The Biden administration had eliminated medical debt from a credit score, and the Trump administration just reversed that. And so you have a whole host of of people. I mean, I have no idea what the numbers we're talking about, who just in one day, all of a sudden can no longer qualify to rent an apartment. And then it just becomes an incredible spiral where you have these like sort of I don't know what else to say, like these parasitical business entities that are there to just like, we're going to exploit the shit out of this now.
Yeah, I think that is what was so striking, is that at every single step in these families' journeys, as documented in this book, there are entire business models designed not just to profit off their insecurity and to capitalize on it, but to really exacerbate it, to ensure that this crisis of housing and homelessness is not meaningfully addressed. And in that sense, I think that we really have to reckon with that profit motive lurking, and not just the private equity firms, but the co-signing companies, all of these entities, the application fees that families have to pay just to apply for an apartment with no guarantee they'll be, that their application will be approved. They lose hundreds of dollars per application just in applying these non-refundable fees. So homelessness has become big business in this country. And until we really confront that, I think, it's not going to end. And it's not enough to just say we need to build more housing. We need to let the market do its thing. We need to cut regulation, cut the red tape, and then the market will sort of take care of these needs. No, we have to address it at its source, which to me is not to put too fine a point on it, but it's capitalism. It is the fact that the ability to stay housed in this country has been left to a system, and a system that has really no financial incentive in keeping them stable, that is really militating against the security at every turn. And I think that is very much
the entire incentive is to keep them trapped in this cycle. I mean, it's like like payday loan companies. I mean, it has the same dynamic of like, the more, once we get you in our clutches, like you have less and less chance of avoiding our clutches.
Exactly. I mean, there's that famous Baldwin quote about, how extremely expensive it is to be poor in America. I think what these families' experiences illustrate is sort of the flip side of that, which is how extremely lucrative all of this insecurity has become for some.
Yeah, and you hinted at it there, just about this is not being a supply problem. This is a problem of over commodification. And you have these companies like Blackstone that are just buying up these single family homes, and it also gives an opportunity for them to orient. Well, I mean, that's about how purchasing homes and less about maybe some of these more apartment buildings, but it's still the same dynamic that you describe, which is just like, the problem is that all the power lies with landlords and corporations and none with tenants.
That's right. I don't know if you guys remember, but during the pandemic, in the early days of the pandemic, there were these two brothers in Tennessee who were driving around buying up hand sanitizer at every Dollar General they could find. And they rented a U-Haul and they stockpiled all of this hand sanitizer in there. And they made headlines. They were rightly vilified. There were calls for them to be prosecuted. And I remember thinking at that time, when I was in the middle of this reporting, that is what we've allowed housing to become in this country. We have allowed for it to be hoarded up, essentially thrown in a U-Haul truck, and then auctioned off to the highest bidder. And we don't call that by its proper name, which is price gouging. We just call that supply and demand economics. We say that, this scarcity has produced this need. Never mind the ways that that scarcity itself has been arguably engineered. But that scarcity has produced a condition where this fundamental human necessity is just being auctioned off to the highest bidder. We see it really clearly, like after the wildfires in California, where landlords were jacking up rents overnight by 100%, 120%. And again, there's justified outrage at that. But I think what I'm trying to suggest is that is just the normal rental market in widening swaths of America today. In Atlanta, in Nashville, in Charlotte, that is what it is like to be a renter. Rents being jacked up way past the rate of inflation, past the rate of what it would cost to cover, growing insurance costs and property taxes, just because they can get away with it.
Let's talk about how race mixes with this, because both from your book and from some of the interviews I have read with you, you've outlined how in the context of Atlanta, it was something, I think it was like 93% of people who are unhoused, not necessarily officially, but within the context of this sort of netherworld are Black, but that it really is the most marginalized, economically deprived cohort of people in various cities, and that who that cohort changes based upon what city it is. Could you go into that to that dynamic?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because when I started this project, I really wanted to have, to sort of like check all these demographic boxes. I wanted to have this diversity of subjects where, the white working class character, family, individual. And as I began reporting, as I was standing in line at these food pantries on Saturday morning, every single person in line was Black. And as you mentioned, in a city that is no longer majority Black. Atlanta once was majority Black, but it no longer is. It's about, I believe, 47% Black now. 93% of families who are homeless in this city are Black. So in many ways, to find that one family somewhere off, who is homeless right now would be really forced, because this is what homelessness looks like in Atlanta. The racialized character of housing precarity and homelessness is absolutely pronounced. And as you mentioned, it will take a different form in different cities and different regions. I reported a magazine story several years ago in Salinas, California, where the overwhelming majority of people who were homeless were migrant families and Latino farm workers. So it does vary. In Minnesota, where I recently was, it's Indigenous and Native American families and individuals, but the racialized character is there. And, there's a moment in the book where Natalia, she has enrolled in an associate's degree program at Georgia State. She's reading this history book and her eyes are being opened. She has this moment of revelation where in reading about sort of the post-Reconstruction period in America and how the promise of 40 mules and a slave was broken. And you had millions of men, women, and children who were freed, emancipated from slavery into a country where they were systematically deprived of property rights, of ownership rights. She's realizing that is where her own story, her own experience of housing insecurity begins. And, and that was a revelation for me too, because the Wikipedia version of homelessness and housing insecurity in America, it starts with, it's basically a white story. It begins in the colonial era and then through the Civil War with, white soldiers returning home, but their homes are no longer there. And on through, Jacob Riis's Great Army of Tramps, in the lead up to the Depression and so forth. That is kind of the official story of homelessness in America. But I think there's a different story we can tell where, again, millions of people are forced into a labor economy of low wages, rent, and debt. And that has just continued through a history of redlining, of restricted covenants, of all sorts of practices that have just again and again perpetuated dispossession, displacement, and discrimination. And that, I believe, is what has produced that 93% statistic.
Is there, and I mean, I would imagine the lack of political power is both racialized and obviously a function of just the material deprivation, and so it's much easier for it to be submerged as a political issue, and particularly when on the other side of that you have people making a lot of money who definitely have access to state lawmakers, to city lawmakers, to federal lawmakers. And to the extent that they're advocating for anything, it is nothing that's going to stop this cycle, because that's how they're enriching themselves.
Yeah. I remember during the reporting after, and this is something that happens toward the end of the book, after about a dozen families are evicted at gunpoint from this extended stay hotel, Efficiency Lodge. They're evicted from gunpoint because they have lost their jobs. They can't pay their hotel rent. And the hotel hires this private militia basically to come in, point semi-automatic weapons in the faces of children and their parents, forcing them out of the rooms that they've lived in some cases for years, forcing them out. And a few days after that, I was with all of these families at a nearby park. A local group called Housing Justice League was trying to organize these residents, these families, against the owner of this property, trying to organize protests. And it was the same day that the election results were announced, that Biden had won. And at that time, Georgia was on the verge of turning blue, and there was all this excitement in certain, my neighborhood, the neighborhood I live in around that, or in progressive circles. And I remember thinking, standing with these families, they are completely off the radar of both parties. The abandonment of these families has been a bipartisan project, a bipartisan phenomenon. And, they couldn't have cared less standing in that park that this person had just won the presidency and not this person. And I don't want to be glib about that, because there are actual differences. But, over the next 4 years, through the Biden years, the circumstances that families like them were going through changed not at all. And a caseworker in the book, Carla Wells, I really appreciate something she says. She has been in the trenches of homeless services for many years. And she basically says, what my clients need, yes, they need money. Yes, they need resources. But what they need more than anything is power. They feel powerless to even understand what is happening to them. Like, why can't we just have a roof over our head? Why can't we just know from one night to the next where me and my children are going to be living? Just a complete and utter lack of power. And for her, that is the most devastating fact about what these families are experiencing.
How much of what they're experiencing do they perceive as systemic, and how much of it do they perceive as a function of their own poor life choices or something like that? Because I just remember, I think it was Nomad Land. I can't remember but that was
Nomad Land, Jessica Bruders.
Yeah. Yes, we interviewed them. I feel like 5-10 years ago. And one of the things that they sort of really recognized, and this is a lot of people lost their homes during the housing crisis, was that almost to a person, they did not perceive, at least for a long time, that there was anything systemic about this, that it was all a function of, I made bad decisions, I got unlucky, or whatever it was, that there was no sense of that.
I think one of the things that was hardest for me in spending all of this time with these families day after day after day was seeing the shame that especially the parents internalized about what they were going through. Even though we would sit for hours and hours and I would be trying to like show them, like, look at the larger picture here. This is not your fault. Like, you are doing everything you're supposed to do. You are working your ass off. There are not enough hours in the week for you to work. Like, you are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. You are doing everything you are supposed to do in this country to have just stability, and it's not there, and it's not your fault. And even though I would say that, like, the shame was still there. It was just omnipresent for them. And it makes me think of this. There was an article written, I believe in the late 80s or early 90s by Peter Marcuse, the son of Herbert Marcuse. Peter Marcuse is a brilliant thinker on housing in America. He's largely neglected today, which is a shame. But he had an article in the Socialist Review, I believe it was, called Neutralizing Homelessness. And what he's talking about there is the way that homelessness, this crisis that was mounting back then, that had just exploded in the United States, how it had been neutralized, how it had been stripped of its properly political, economic implications and root causes, and instead had become a story about individual pathology and about life choices and about mental illness and addiction and housing and the economy and racist, a history of racist housing policy. All of that had sort of been left out, and homelessness as a phenomenon had been neutralized. And I think that is what is happening when these families, despite even like knowing the larger picture, like seeing it, like it's still, there's a leap to embracing that. And I think in the same way that until recently in this country, healthcare was also kind of depoliticized. Like if you went bankrupt because you had cancer, and you couldn't afford your medical bills, that was seen as like, well, you should have made better decisions, instead of, no, this is a reflection of how, of this uniquely American malady that is utterly avoidable and preventable. Like in the same way, I think housing and homelessness has yet to be properly politicized in that way, even though an entire movement of tenant organizing and housing justice is helping to change that.
We should say that Trump's executive order issued last week, it seems to me, does exactly, pushes that narrative dramatically. It literally, I think the first line in purpose and policy: endemic vagrancy, disorderly behavior, sudden confrontations, violent attacks. It's all, the implication is that that people are homeless because they're on drugs. They're homeless because they have mental or emotional problems. The overwhelming majority of these individuals, it says, of the people who are homeless on a single night, 275,000, which of course just means like not, on the streets or not in a shelter. it's just a drop in the bucket. Overwhelming majority of these individuals are addicted to drugs, have a mental condition, or both. 2/3 of homeless individuals report having regularly used hard drugs. This is all a way to marginalize people and to obfuscate the fact that this is a systemic problem.
Yeah. And it's nothing new in this country. Since the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, when mass homelessness first erupted, this has been the tactic. And it's a tactic that then went through successive presidential administrations to basically control the narrative around why are so many people deprived of housing in this country. And of course, they don't see it as being deprived of housing. They just see it as kind of a choice to not have a home. This is nothing new. This is an old tactic. And I was really surprised to go back to that earlier moment in the 80s when all of this was first emerging, to find that the Reagan administration actually actively shaped even the research that could be conducted on homelessness. There was an article in the journal Nature called Reagan versus the Social Sciences, because like ethnographers, sociologists, demographers, public health scholars who wanted to study the effects of racist housing policy, who wanted to study the effects of the gutted social safety net, the gutting of low-income housing support and so forth on homelessness. They were denied grants. And the people who were funded were people who were looking at the link between mental illness and addiction or alcoholism and homelessness. The National Institute for Mental Health became the primary purveyor of knowledge about homelessness in America. And that attempt to control the narrative was successful. By the end of the 80s, the New York Times and CBS News conducted a poll of New Yorkers at random asking what causes homelessness. And the number one answer was psychological problems. The number two answer was a refusal to work, laziness. Not a single person mentioned housing. And meanwhile, the fastest growing segment of the homeless population at that time were children under the age of 6. So there is a direct line of continuity from that obfuscation, that concerted attempt to obscure the true causes of homelessness and what we're seeing today. And it's violent, it's horrific, and the attempt to just get people off the street, to push them out of sight, or as will probably be the case, to push them into these concentration camps where they may be forced into free labor. That will do nothing. That will maybe address the tip of the iceberg, those who are on the street, but that will do nothing to address the rest of the iceberg under the water surface, which is in many ways what my book is about, this vast iceberg under the surface. And it will just continue to come out into the open because the root causes are not being addressed.
Trump and Kushner, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, both slumlords. Trump had cut his teeth, I think, as depicted in that movie with the Apprentice, with Roy Cohn, because he was being sued over discriminatory housing policy. The Trumps were, and then Kushner was a more advanced model of this, of milking all of his tenants for their worth with these decrepit housing developments. And it just, to me, it feels like also orienting our economy around home ownership and how heavily financialized that has been is a big part of this as well. It has widened the gap between owners, which include landlords and increasingly private equity and these big financial firms, and people who are trying to get housing just to survive. Is that the big story here? Is also how the banks and home ownership has widened this gap?
Yeah, I mean, home ownership is becoming elusive for people for whom it was very much within reach, a decade ago, 2 decades ago. So that the ranks of the renter class, and not just the temporary renter class, but a semi-permanent renter class, the ranks of that population is growing by the day. Some numbers that are just outrageous. Like right now in America, there are about 53 million workers who are earning under $10.30 an hour. Since 1985, rents have outpaced income gains by 325%. These kinds of statistics show us that this is not just some bizarre aberration that I'm documenting in this book. These families are not some marginal phenomenon. This is the condition, in many cases, of renting as a poor and and increasingly a middle class or downwardly mobile middle class member of the society. And this latest budget, the big beautiful budget, it just for detention centers alone, it's allocating $45 billion. That's more than 4 times what the US government spent last year in building new affordable housing. And so, I think I'm not a politician, but if I were a politician, I would be proclaiming every day that we are spending 4 times as much on cages, on putting human beings in cages, as we are on just putting people in homes and building homes. So, there are just these realities that once you see them, it's like like, I mean, I'm an anthropologist. My background is in anthropology before I was a journalist. And anthropologists, like, our basic move is to take the familiar and make it strange to seem sort of bizarre. And nowhere is that more urgent, I think, than when it comes to housing. Like, how utterly bizarre is it that this is what we're doing? This is what we're doing with this fundamental human necessity. And so, yeah, I didn't think when I finished this book that it could get any worse, but what we're seeing right now is gasoline just being poured on an already disastrous situation.
And what you said earlier about what happened during the Reagan administration and the impact of it 40 some odd years later and continued impact. I think, when we start to see these things, why are they not taking any more data in the Department of Education? Why are they not taking any more data in terms of EPA and climate change? I mean, all of these things are designed to hide the reality of what's going on. Very often a function of capitalism. I mean, the vast majority of roads lead back to that because we have incentivized the wrong things in our society and empowered the wrong people. I can't encourage people to read your book enough. There are in the final chapters, there's policy prescriptions and stories of attempts to organize, which are very difficult for folks who are having to struggle with so many material issues. That the idea of starting a political journey to gain political power, is secondary to making sure that your kids have a place to live, and your family has a place to live. But it's fascinating, and I think at one point the housing as an investment vehicle, and providing housing as a burgeoning business is in many ways the biggest, if not maybe perhaps not the only, but certainly close to the only culprit. Brian Goldstone, the book is There's No Place for Us, Working in Homeless in America. We will put a link to that at majority.fm and in the podcast and YouTube description. Thanks again. So really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for this great conversation.
Thank you. All
right, folks. Really fascinating stuff and a lot to be learned there across a bunch of different policies and issues that we have in this country. All right, we're going to take a break, head into the fun half where some of it will probably be fun.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, we didn't get off to the right start with that Blinken clip, which elevated my heart rate, I gotta say.
Nope. Every day, another thing to be.
And if you just put 10% of your effort towards saying Hamas should knock it off and give the hostages
There's
back.
just something about the concerned face, like you are a phony mother effer, truly.
I mean, but how many of us have just put 10% of our efforts into saying people should have homes? And then why? Maybe that's why we have that problem.
Look, if you just put 10% of your efforts towards saying Mandela should tell South African blacks to get their act together, maybe this apartheid stuff would have sorted it out. I'm just spitballing here. It's just, don't you feel like you're the one who should be contrite in this moment?
I just also love the idea that you had complete control over this, but you needed some sort of energy balance from the collective protests for it to tip the scales of your own actions.
If this 10% had said that, maybe we would have been able to get more 2,000-pound bombs to bomb tents, and then this problem would have gone away.
You would have taken 10% of the time to say Israel would never bomb a hospital.
My God.
Oh, God. Remember those conversations?
Well, I certainly do. Some people seem to think it's going to be forgotten, but
I will not forget.
Folks, your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, but you get the fun half, which is, at least once or twice a week fun or moments. But it's your support that makes this show possible. You can help this show survive and thrive by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, Just Coffee, Fair Trade Coffee, hot chocolate. Use the coupon code Majority. Get 10% off. You can buy the Majority Report blend. So check it out. Matt, Left Reckoning.
Yeah, Left Reckoning. We actually had Brian on a week or so ago talking about the same book. So if you want more, I would check that out. It's a really great book. Maybe one of the books of the year. Also, Dave and I did a Sunday show yesterday. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. You get access to that. Talked about, well, this Blinken clip. Talked about Jeff Daniels and every other liberal taking the wrong message from Doris Kearns Goodwin's team of rivals, which is that apparently they think Lincoln filled his cabinet up with a bunch of centrists.
That's the opposite of what happened.
The rivals were abolitionists.
That he was seen as the centrist.
So Jeff Daniels saying Kamala would have been like Lincoln because she would have put Liz Cheney in her cabinet. Like, I had an aneurysm trying to discuss that and how, I mean, Blinker.
Jeff Daniels, the actor?
Yeah, he's talking with some CNN folks. Yeah, it's on the sound sheet actually today too. If we wanted to.
Why is she like nobody?
Because everyone's a baby.
Because she's a black woman.
No, no.
Why they assume she's this like
no? It's because
liberal?
It's because they don't have any frame of reference for presidential politics besides Barack Obama and the conversation around Barack Obama. Every liberal read one book, which was Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals, and they didn't actually read it. They heard Doris Kearns Goodwin talk about it. About how look at all the different personalities in Lincoln's cabinet, but now it's a license to include like Zionists and corporatists in your cabinet.
They don't have enough say in society, Matt.
It's driving me absolutely insane how, I mean, kindergarten our politics is in this country. But anyway.
I guess he would be the dumber from Dumb and Dumber.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
Three months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow.
What? What is that going on?
It's nuts.
Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.